Hi everyone, my name is Tara Hong and welcome to CMAA Civic Education 101 Episode 2 about Lowell City Councilors. And today we will be talking with George Ramirez. George Ramirez made history in Lowell when he became the first Latinx person ever to get elected to the City Council. He moved to Lowell from Colombia when he was only 8 years old. He learned English at St. Patrick's School and at the Adams Street. He also attended Lowell High School and University of Massachusetts Lowell, and later went to Suffolk Law School to continue his education. And he also made his name despite the odds. He was elected to the City Council for one term in 2005. Without further ado, please welcome George Ramirez.
So welcome to CMAA's Civic Education Episode 2. Our first question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Where are you from, and what made you settle to Lowell if you weren't born in Lowell?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. I think that these kinds of services will serve other people. It's always good to have these sort of interviews as a resource, as a background for people. So thank you for having me, and I'm happy to be here. So I was born in South America, Colombia in 1964. And my dad had been recruited by Raytheon to come here and be a machinist. And so he came here first and the family stayed back. And once he felt he was settled enough, he called the family here. And so we came over here in '73, and it was my mother, my father, two sisters, a younger brother, and myself. So I don't think I had much of a choice in the matter at the time. I was just a young kid, being given an opportunity at a better life.
When you moved here, did you move straight to Lowell, or?
Yes, we moved straight to Lowell and have never left. Lowell has always been a very welcoming community, and we felt home here, so we've stayed here.
So when you, growing up in Lowell, what were kind of some of the inspiration or some of the issues that you took with you when you decided to run for City Councilor in 2005?
Right. My growing up here was not unlike many other inner city kids. I spent my early years at St. Patrick's School and on Adams Street, right here in the Acre. And then from there I went to Lowell High School. From there I went on to UMass Lowell, and then I went on to law school later. It's kind of a funny story related to this. When I was in high school, I was a senior in high school, and I belonged to the government club. And one day they were having an election in the school to elect two representatives from the school and student government who would then go to the State House and role play as a legislator for the day. So I had zero interest in that. I'm a social guy, so I got involved with government. A friend of mine, Chris Smith, decided that it would be pretty funny just to put my name in the hat, and never told me. So I was sitting in English class, Mrs. Leary's class, and they announced the results, and they said, "Oh, George Ramirez got elected." And so I remember thinking, geez, I didn't even know I was involved in this. So that was really my first sort of foray into any kind of elective politics. Obviously, I went on to serve in that role and had a lot of fun and learned a lot. From that moment on, I went on to the University of Lowell, where I was a political science major. And I had a lot of interest in politics, not only the policy end of it, the big issues that the country and the state and the municipality were dealing with, but I also really took an interest in the political side, the elected side, how to run campaigns, the strategy behind running campaigns, how to get the vote out, that became something that I really immersed myself in. And I started volunteering on campaigns. I think the first campaign I ever volunteered for may have been for a former counselor by the name of Bobby Kennedy. I didn't know him from Adam, but I walked into the headquarters one day and introduced myself and said I'd like to volunteer. And naturally, every campaign is not going to turn away a volunteer, so they said, sure, can you go hand out some literature on Saturday, or can you stand on this corner on this particular day holding a sign? And so while I was doing that in my last year of college, I volunteered for an internship at the Massachusetts State House, and I interned for former State Senator Paul Sheehy. And there it opened my eyes more to the State House and to the policy and to legislation and how that works, and helping constituents. Senators and legislators are not unlike Lowell City Councilors and school committees. They're just in a bigger platform. And so when folks call them with an issue, with a concern, it would fall on the staff and interns to get some of that work done. And so I began to sort of get my hands really involved in all of that. And that's really sort of what started me down the path of thinking about running for the council.
So you mentioned that working part of that leadership role requires staffing and a lot of hands-on work to get the job done. So what made you decide to be the main player then?
Right. Well, so to continue on the last comment, so I graduated from college. I got married. I raised kids. I went on to law school at night, but all the while still being involved in politics locally, assisting with campaigns, always volunteering on campaigns, always volunteering with the Democratic City Committee. And so I was as informed as I think you could be, not only with what it takes to run a campaign, but which parts of the city vote the most, who the players were, who were the elected officials, and you get to know them because you volunteer them and you're exposed to them. And so back in 2005, I think it was, a gentleman by the name of Kendall Wallace. He was a longtime newspaper man in Lowell. I believe he started out as a newspaper delivery boy and went all the way up to be a publisher. He had been in Lowell for many, many years. I think he's since retired down in Florida. He wrote an article. He used to write an article weekly that was a political article, and he would talk about the issues facing the city and the politics facing the city. And so he wrote one article that said, where have all the good candidates gone? Or where are they now? Is anybody interested in running? Something to that effect. And I remember thinking on a Sunday morning, like, are you talking to me? Because, I'm ready to go. And I remember thinking that, I'm being facetious, but I remember thinking, why don't you step up, George? You're kind of being called out. You've spent enough time volunteering. You've got an undergraduate degree in politics. You know the way government and how government works. Why don't you step up? And that's what made me say, hey, you know what? Why not me? Why don't I step up and run? I think I have a few things to say. I'd like to have a voice, and if by extension the Hispanic community or any other minority community feels like if he can do it, I can do it. All of that went into it. It wasn't driven by one particular thing. It was more of a combination of things.
How would you define the role of a city councilor? What do they do? What is their job?
Right. I think it has many roles realistically. One is constituent services. You've got to represent your constituents. So if somebody calls you from some part of the city and says, hey, there's a big pothole in front of my house and everybody keeps going over it and they keep getting flats and that's an issue, you've got to call that person back and say, thank you, let me look into it for you. And you would call the city manager's office and you would say, can you have the Department of DPW go over there and fill up that pothole? If they called you about a tree that fell, I'm just thinking of basic services, but one role is to represent your constituent. Another role is to think about the city in the big picture. How do we attract businesses to the city for economic development? How do we support the school system so that they can have a strong education system to attract young families? So there's that part of it. Then there's the actual part of managing. The city council oversees the city manager. The city manager works for the council. And so you've got to educate yourself on the issues so that when the city manager makes their presentations to you about how they are advancing the city, what are the issues that the manager thinks are most important at that time, that you educate yourself so you can give the manager direction. You're not there to say yes, yes, yes to everything the city manager does. If they're doing a good job, you support them and you encourage them. But if you feel like, yeah, that's not the most important issue facing the city and the voters, then you want to say to the manager, well, that's a good idea, but why don't we put that one on hold because we need to do this first. Same thing with the budget, the city budget. You know, this Lowell is the 4th largest city in the Commonwealth with a very large budget. So the city council, it's a part-time job. It takes a lot. You've got to read, if you're not used to it, it takes a long time to get used to a budget, to be able to read it and be able to make decisions and suggestions on where to cut the budget and where to place your bets, where to invest more. So the council has a very, very large and responsible roles. It passes local legislation. It makes, proposes issues. So it's a very important role.
And as you mentioned, like being a city councilor is a part-time job, but it's not really, right? There's so many responsibilities. So how did you balance your personal life, your work, and other roles that you had?
Right, it's not easy because I also had young children at the time when I served, and so you become an expert at time management, right? So my kid's got to be at baseball at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, but there's an event at 11 o'clock over in the Highlands. So you drop off your child, you watch a few innings, you tell your wife you'll be right back, you run over to the Highlands, you shake a few hands, you make sure that you represent the city, and then you dart back. And then you're doing that all of the time. That's one. And as I said earlier, you're also doing your own homework about the city. The great thing about being a city councilor is that you have usually very talented people that work in government in the department heads make presentations to you. They inform you. Well, we are going to do the Hamilton Canal District, and this is what we're proposing for those 16 acres. We're going to do some housing. We're going to do some commercial. Well, that's interesting. So you're also, when you have a moment, trying to study up on that. Well, geez, are we going to have too much housing downtown? Is housing good for downtown? Should we bring in more commercial businesses because that means more taxes will come into the city? So, there's more than meets the eye of being an elected official, and I don't think people think about that enough.
For the young people out there looking to get into politics, what advice would you give them?
I would say educate yourself about government. I would say if you have an opportunity to serve on a city board, and I don't know how many there are, but there are many city boards that you can fill out an application and get an appointment. And by sitting on that board, you are going to get a sense of how the city works. You're going to learn something about the city. You're going to get familiar with Robert's rules of law, which of running a meeting. How does a meeting run? When do you put a motion? Who seconds it? The fact that you need a majority to pass something. that's a nice way to sort of learn a little bit before you just jump into the fray. Serve on your neighborhood committee. You know, each neighborhood has the Belvedere Association, the Pawtuckville Association, the Downtown Association. Go to those meetings. Find out what issues they're talking about and how are they advocating them to the city hall, to government, so that you can know about what's going on around you. If you find out that, for instance, Laurie Trahan, Congressman Trahan, has office hours, go one of these days, sign up and introduce yourself and ask her to speak to you for a few minutes about what are some of the concerns that she's working on. She's terrific. She's open. She is very encouraging. Same thing with the legislators. Ed Kennedy. Ed Kennedy is a wonderful resource. He served at the council and now he's a senator. He'd be somebody that would be open. Ratty, all of them would be. A city councilor. Call Mayor Leahy, call Councilor Mercier, and ask them to have a cup of coffee on a Saturday or Sunday and say, you know, what have been your experiences? If we take advantage of all of those things, you've got a more informed electorate. People will be more apt to say, you know, now that I think of it, that's not my cup of tea. Or they might say, wow, is that interesting? That is definitely what I want to do in the future. So that's what I would say. I would say take a look around, find out what boards, what nonprofits might have an opportunity for somebody like me to serve. That's what I would suggest.
All right. Well, that concludes all of the questions that we have for you. Thank you so much for spending your time with CMA today, and we hope to hear from you later on.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation very much, and I too am looking forward to this upcoming election. So thank you.
Thank you, George, for your time and sharing your story with us today. We as a community also looking forward for the new election system. And for the audience, thank you so much for following our 3 broadcasts. Hope you learned something about what does the City Council do, and don't forget to go out and vote this year. This has been CMA Civic Education 101 Episode 2 on the Lowell City Councilor. Have a nice day.